this time you think that you're in glorious vision on the screen. So if I'm actually clever here and I put my hand out like that when I'm talking to you, that will stop everyone from seeing you at the same time. So it'd be great. So,
where would you like me to look?
You may look anywhere you like. It does not matter in the slightest where you look. Look at the audience.
All the pretty girls?
Look at me.
Yes.
Yeah, you can indeed. The most prettiest is at the back of the room. My wife is there, you see. So, and she's the prettiest girl. She might even stop reading the paper if I mention the fact she's reading the paper now. You see, instead. Clearly, I'm so riveting today, darling, that the news of the world is more important than anything we're saying. But never mind. Anyway. There are so many places I could start talking to you, Chris. There's a few things I've noticed about your career from watching a few bits, and a few bits we're going to show you of your career today as well to help jog the memory. But let's just start with that opening night of ITV, because you were there, weren't you?
I was. Bear in mind that I was one of probably 200 or 300 people who had never worked in television in our lives. We'd come from all walks of life. And I was told I would be a floor manager because I'd been a stage manager in the theatre. And so my job on opening night was to be the floor manager of the cabaret which came from the Mayfair Hotel, starring George Formby. Now that shows you how long ago it was, because none of you, I'm sure, have even heard of George Formby, let alone ever seen him. I used to be a great fan of George Formby, and I was really excited. On my first day working in television, I'm going to be actually working beside George Formby. The disaster was they forgot to turn up the PA system, so the audience couldn't hear him at all. It went out over the air, obviously. It wasn't my fault that I didn't turn the right switch on, but nobody in the audience heard his song or his lyrics, so they didn't laugh in the right places. So I think it was considered a bit of a disaster. But, I mean, the very fact that the first night of commercial television ever got off the ground was a miracle. And we all got in the next day and suddenly realised we've got to get some programmes on today as well. We've been so busy rehearsing the first night, people had rather lost sight of the fact there's going to be a second, a third and a fourth, and so on. But that's how it all started.
So when or how did you make that switch then from floor manager to director?
Now that was quite interesting. We used to do things called advertising magazines. I don't know whether you remember. You won't remember them because you're all far too young. But perhaps you know about them. Do you know
Ad
about
mags, as they call
Ad
them?
mags, yeah.
Yeah.
Now these are little 15-minute programs that had a sort of story running through them. The most famous one was Jim's Inn. You probably know about that. Jimmy Hanley ran a pub, and people would come into the pub, and they were allowed to advertise things within the narrative line. So he'd sort of say from behind the pub as he pulled the pint, have you tried these new cigarettes? They cost so much and they come in nicely wrapped or whatever. Or we do these chocolates, and they would do the advertising sort of within the story. Well, I was floor managing one of these advertising magazines one day. They were usually on very early in the evening or late at night. And I went up to the bar for a drink after the recording, and I think it was a late night one. And the guy in charge of advertising magazines was complaining that he hadn't got enough directors. He said, I've got 20 advertising magazines I've got to get in between now and Christmas, and I've only got 2 directors. They can't do them all. Does anybody want to have a go at directing one? Well, I think I must have had 1 beer more than I should have, because I said, yeah, all right, I'll have a go. So finally he said, come into my office tomorrow morning. Now that couldn't happen today. And I was saying to Chris earlier on, the whole reason I ever worked in television was a sheer fluke, and the very fact that I became a director was a fluke as well. I'd been floor managing for some time. They gave me this advertising magazine to direct, and the day after it was transmitted, the head of drama at Rediffusion, a guy called Norman Marshall, who knew me quite well because I'd floor managed lots of plays, phoned me up and said, I didn't know you were a director. And I said, well, neither did I. And he said, well, I saw that ad mag you did last night. That was okay. Well, it was considered okay if you didn't get the cameras in shot, the scenery didn't fall over, the captions were straight, and it finished on time. It was a good show. So he said, well, it seemed okay to me. Do you want to have a go at a play? Well, what do? You either say no, in which case it's an opportunity you will regret for the rest of your life, or you say, I'll have a go. So I said, yes, please. So actually the second thing I directed was a live 90-minute play. And there's one you haven't got down in your list. It was called The Camel's Back. And I'm sure the reason you haven't got it down is because nobody ever recorded it, because there was no way of recording it. It went out over the ether, and there it was. And from then on, I was considered to be a drama director, so I was lucky.
I brought along a little souvenir of time at Rediffusion. This is probably the oldest surviving 2-inch in existence, actually, from 1957. It's a play called Women in Love, which I don't think you actually worked on.
I might have.
You had done floor managing bit in it. Well, I brought it along really because I was intrigued of your memories of what it was like working with this old 2-inch tape. You know, and the many
I expect you all know about it. I mean, are these all experts?
No.
I mean, this was what the very first video recording machines that came into the country were black magic. They really were. None of us thought it was possible to record a picture on tape. I mean, it's now common practice, and we all know about it. You can record it on discs, for God's sake. But they put notices up in the corridor. Would directors like to come down during their lunch break and see a demonstration of video recording? And it was black magic. You know, there it was. They'd record a scene and they'd play it back instantaneously. Superb quality, black and white, admittedly. And we thought this is going to revolutionize the industry. And, of course, it did. I should think if there was one invention that completely changed television forever, it must have been the invention of the video recorder. But the greatest brains in the world said, of course, it'll never replace film, because you'll never be able to edit it. What rubbish they talk, don't they? I mean, you know, you can now edit digital tape, which is that size, probably more accurately and certainly more easily and infinitely more cheaply than you can edit film. And they all said it wouldn't ever be possible. But that was how we started.
What was it like trying to edit 2-inch tape?
Impossible. I mean, Rediffusion was particularly bad because the hierarchy there, with live television, you see, they could control it. They could say, you're in the studio at 9 o'clock at night, you're on the air, and you're off the air at 10. The moment you have recording, you'd get directors to say, I need another 10 minutes, or I need another quarter of an hour, I must have another half an hour, or I need more recording time. And they didn't like this because they could see their costs were rising. So they restricted editing for quite a long time at Rediffusion, which was the company I worked for. But gradually, of course, they had to allow it. But it was very, very difficult to edit. It was almost impossible. So what we used to do, we used to make our plays or episodes of series or whatever they were, we used to make them in chunks. So you'd perhaps do them a scene at a time, and you perhaps record a 3 or 4 minute scene with 4 cameras, then you'd have a break, move the cameras over and do the next scene. If you really had the time, you could do each scene once, maybe twice if you were lucky, but they didn't give you much time. Then you could cut the scenes together. That wasn't too difficult, because the way you had to actually edit that, you can't get a still picture on it, because the tape is passing the recording heads this way and the recording heads are spinning that way. So what they're doing is they're striping the information on the tape. So, as I say, you can't get a still picture. So what you do, if you had to edit at the end of a scene, it wasn't too bad, because as the camera faded out, you put a little mark on the tape, and then as the next scene faded up, you put a mark on the tape. Then with the razor blade, you'd cut those 2 bits together and stick them with sellotape. Once you'd stuck it together, that was it. There was no way you could change it, so you had to get it right. If you were really brave, you might have had a terrible moment where perhaps an actor fluffed or something, or really got lost, or the plot went haywire or whatever, and you'd shoot a close-up. And if you were going to really take your life in your hands, you'd try and cut that close-up in. And 9 times out of 10 you got away with it, because the editors were pretty good, and they would, as I say, you can't get a still picture, so they let the tape go through and they'd mark it with a yellow Chinograph, and they'd mark where you want to come in again, and they'd watch it over and over again. Then they'd put it on this block, and you'd sit there nibbling your fingernails, and they'd bring the razor blade across, and you'd know, well, that's it. Then they'd wind it forward to the next thing. Then they'd put the bit in that they wanted, and then you'd hold your breath and look at it. It would take 20 minutes perhaps to do one tape. And if you got it wrong, you get a terrible frame roll. Nothing you could do about it, because you had to cut it. I'm sorry, I'm going on
awfully
on with it. You had to cut it in exactly the right place. You can't just say that's where the China mark is, because there are things. Don't ask me to tell you what they are, but hello. There are things. Yeah, that's it. There are things called sync pulses, which run along the bottom of the tape, which keep it in sync, so that when it's being played back on that sort of machinery, the same head that recorded it, if you can imagine there are 4 heads on a thing like a saucer, 1, 2, 3, 4, the same head that actually recorded it has to play it back, the same corresponding head on whatever machine you put it on. So these sync pulses along the bottom, don't ask me what they are, keep the tape running at the right speed in relation to the recording heads. So you put iron filings in suspension and alcohol, you have a little cotton wool bud, and they'd rub that along the bottom of the tape, and that makes these sync pulses show up, and they're about 1/8 of an inch apart. And you have to cut in between them, and then you have to cut in between. You could tell which one was the recording head, 1, 2, 3 and 4. When you come to the other side of the cut, you had to cut in the right place and put it in. So it was fairly dicey. So that's why they didn't like us doing it. But we used to do it, and then gradually, of course, time code came in, then the sort of electronic editing which we've got now, which is unbelievable, as I'm sure you all know.
That's fascinating. You did so much live work for Rediffusion. We're going to try and show you a piece from No Hiding Place.
Oh, that I would love to see.
Mark wants to have a little look at this. Obviously, when we looked at your work, you weren't just doing drama though, you were also doing sitcoms, Mr H, 3 Live Wires, working with Michael Medley.
3 Live Wires?
That's
you haven't
right.
got any of that?
No, sadly doesn't exist anymore. Unfortunately, it's all gone the way of a lot of modern stuff. Tell me about No Hiding Place, what you remember about doing.
No Hiding Place, well,
shows like
now
that.
you see, that was extraordinary, because we used to do 1 a week, live, or ultimately on tape, but as live. When you did it on tape, you could consider it as live, because you'd have to do each part in a lump. So basically it was like a live show. So you would get a week's rehearsal. Now you had probably 4 or 5 directors working on a series, but you only had 1 Inspector Lockhart and 1, what was his name?
Eric Lander.
Eric Lander was the
Johnny
actor. I
Briggs
forgot. Baxter,
Michael,
Sergeant Baxter.
Yeah.
You only had 1 of them. Now, obviously you can't work them 7 days a week. So they had a couple of stand-ins. The routine was something like this. I can't remember the exact days. But say the program was transmitted live on a Wednesday night. Another director would take over Raymond Francis and Eric Lander on the Thursday morning, and in a rehearsal room with all the actors that are going to be in the new episode, would just do their scenes, and they would write the moves down. That would be Raymond Francis and Eric Lander. Their 2 stand-ins would watch. Raymond Francis insisted that he would only have to work Thursday morning, then he could get the train back to Eastbourne where he lived. So that was goodbye to Raymond Francis, and you didn't see him again until Monday afternoon. So you rehearsed all the other actors with the stand-ins on Friday, Saturday, maybe Sunday if you needed it, Monday morning. Monday afternoon, Raymond Francis would arrive with Eric Lander, always word perfect. He would then fit in with all the other actors, run his scenes once. You might pass on to him a couple of changes that you worked out. He might say to you, could I change this line, could I change that line, whatever, so you do that. The crew came on Tuesday morning, into the studio Tuesday afternoon, rehearsal, Wednesday all day rehearsal, Wednesday evening transmission, and then Thursday it all started all over again. So you got about 2 afternoons rehearsal, that's all. So that's how No Hiding Place.
Let's have a look at a bit of No Hiding Place, Mark.
Can I go into that?
This is an episode called Home Posting that never got transmitted for some reason.
That might be obvious when we see it.
going home. You do me this little favour, Smudge, and I might have a little word for you. What's going to speak for that lot? Yeah, funny things happen these pursuits, don't they? Must have been the heat, eh, Smudger? Some of them still seem to be affected, don't they? Now look, now, Corporal Smith, these are the keys, right? Now I'm going to lock the door from the outside. I don't like this. Oh, don't you?
Do you remember that at all?
No, I don't. But I will tell you something that might interest you if you didn't realise it. Johnny Briggs, who of course went on to become famous in Coronation Street, who played one of the sergeants.
Goodbye. Sorry?
Sorry.
No, it's okay. You keep going.
More?
It's okay. You're fine. You're back.
No, he started off as one of the stand-ins, and Johnny Briggs was Eric Lander's stand-in for. As I was explaining the way we used to rehearse the show, he was a stand-in for Eric Lander, and then of course he went on to become one of the detectives. Well, and now he's made a fortune in Coronation Street.
And lives in Stourbridge.
Does he really?
He does
I'd
indeed.
love to see him. I wonder
He
if
lives very, very close to us indeed.
Do you know him?
I do know him actually. Yes.
when you see him, tell him he probably won't even remember me, but he might. Do mention my name to him. Do please. And give him my regards and congratulations.
I don't quite know why he ended up living in Stourbridge, particularly when he works in Manchester all the time. But
Well, they're obviously
he seems
such
to
nice
quite-
people here, that's why.
Oh, that's sweet. That's lovely. There was something that strikes me about obviously the Rediffusion stuff. It was what you said, mainly done live or shot as live, but he did shows like Crane, which ended up filming abroad in places like Morocco. How much of that was you actually going abroad to Morocco, or was that done by somebody else?
No, I could do 20 minutes on Crane for you if you want me to, but I mean, Crane did actually break new ground because I think it was one of the first television series to do all its location filming abroad, virtually all its location filming. Now this put a terrific restriction on the writers because we had to have, first of all 13 episodes before we started, so we could go out to Morocco and shoot all the location scenes. Well now, not many series started off with all 13 episodes already written. So that was the first thing that the producer, Bill Lawrence, had to do, get all the scripts. Then we went out to Morocco, and believe me, in those days, we didn't have location managers and wardrobe mistresses and makeup girl. We didn't have all the help they have now. It was me, the producer, a guy called Bill Lawrence, me, the director. We had a unit manager. I had the most wonderful PA, a girl called Erica Klausner. She was extraordinary. She would do anything to help anybody. Wonderful girl. And so between us and the unit manager and the designer, we did everything. We went out in advance. We found the locations. And then obviously the camera crew came and joined us, and we had 2 English cameramen, 2 English sound men, and the rest was local labour that we hired as we went along. We had a Mr. Fix-It that we hired, a guy called Maurice Shrieky, who claimed he could speak 6 languages. Well, if the other 5 were as bad as his English, I'm provided he could make himself understood anywhere, but he could speak the local Arabic and various other, French of course, and various other things. Now, our very first day's location shooting, I must tell you this story because I think it might amuse you. I've told you about Erica. Now, Erica was this lovely PA. I mean, we couldn't have done it without her. And I would say this, I mean, to her face, she would accept it. She was a wonderful PA and a wonderful girl, but she was on the heavy side. And shall we say, without being rude, she was not the prettiest girl in the class. Let's leave it there. We started filming, and we've been at this, I don't know, couple of days, and every time we moved location, we noticed this big black Rolls Royce with blacked out windows would sort of glide to a halt just a few yards from where we were and just sit there. You couldn't see who was inside it. We'd move on to another location, and sure enough, within 10 minutes, this black Rolls Royce would appear. This went on for a couple of days. It was beginning to unnerve everybody. So finally, we said to Maurice Shrieky, could you find out who he did? What does he want? So Maurice Shrieky, the interpreter, toddled over, and we saw the window come down. We couldn't see who was in there. We were getting on with what we were doing, and he was chatting to them. And he came back holding his sides with laughter. So he said, who is it, Erica? Who is it, Morris? What does he want? Who is it? And he said, oh, it is Sheikh, some Arabic name, Alawul Abdul Dal Alal. Oh, he said, what does he want? Said Morris, roaring with laughter. He wants to buy Erica. Well, I saw visions of us being the first television unit to go home with more money than we'd set out with. But the unit manager was a real spoil sport and wasn't having any of it, and said, no, we don't do that sort of thing with our girls. And I'm not too sure about Erica. I think she quite liked the idea, but I know the unit manager hired a security firm and put a guard outside her hotel room door for the next 3 or 4 nights. Whether that was to keep the Sheikh out or Erica in, I'm never quite sure, but we didn't sell her, and we came back with Erica.
Peter Graham Scott tells a little tale that he actually bumped into you filming Crane while he was filming Riviera Police out there.
I think he could be making that up, but I'm not sure. I was once filming on the bill with a car going down a road, and we got the camera inside the car, and as there were 4 or 5 episodes of the bill always being made at once, and sure enough there was another car filming coming the other way, and we both got in each other's shots. But it did happen, because we used to film in a very confined area.
It was very diverse those early days. I noticed that you also did soap operas like Home Tonight.
Yeah.
Which I don't think we actually got all of it up here in the Midlands, and seemed to get curtailed by a massive strike that in about 1960.
That's right. It was 15 minutes. It was a 15-minute a night thing. We used to do the first one live. I can't remember. We used to do 2 on a Monday and 3 on a Tuesday, and that was in the days of video recording. So there was a live one on Monday, then we'd record the Tuesday's episode on Monday night, then we'd record Wednesday, Thursday and Friday's episode on Tuesday, then we'd have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday and Saturday to rehearse the next week. It was a nightmare. I mean, it was crazy, but we did it.
Sadly, I suppose, I say all good things came to an end, but some people liked Rediffusion, some people didn't. I know there's been numerous debates over the years about the output of the channel in terms of whether it. I mean, at the time, the ITC accused it of dumbing down its audience by doing things like No Hiding Place and saying they were very formulaic detective shows and they should be doing Pinter and all the rest of it, you know. And I suppose ABC took more of the credits because of armchair theatre and stuff. So Rediffusion really suffered badly in the franchise change, didn't it? From 67
Rediffusion did.
It lost its franchise.
Unfairly, I think. There were various rumours as to why it happened. I don't know whether they were considered to have had a badly balanced schedule. But on that subject, I mean, I love the story about Lou Grade, who was the managing director of ATV, who mainly did entertainment programs. Yeah. And of course, they were meant to have a balance with the serious programs, cultural programs, religious or whatever. And somebody once said to Lou Grade, I think it was the columnist Keith Waterhouse, I may be wrong, but he said to him, you know, Lou, you're not putting out a fair balance of programs. It's all entertainment, you know. You ought to put out more cultural programs. And Lou Grade tried to defend his schedule, and he said, well, we do this program, he said, late on Wednesday nights at 11:30 called Meet the Press. This is 15 minutes of culture. And Keith Waterhouse said, Lou, that isn't culture. And Lou Grade said, well, it sure as hell ain't entertainment. Which always amuses me. But we did get a bad name, but we did Pinter, funnily enough. Peter Wills, sorry to interrupt you, but Peter Wills did some good drama. And he went to Yorkshire Television from Rediffusion, and I was privileged to be one of the 4 directors he took with him. Mark Miller, James Ormerod, John Franco and me more or less sort of went along with him. And the Yorkshire drama output was often lauded to the skies, and it was the same team making it.
And to begin with, you made some of it in London, I think. We have a play somewhere that Mark's going to try and dig out called Daddy Kiss It
Oh,
Better,
you haven't got that.
Which I know you were very keen to see,
I would
see some of it again.
I would love
Tell
to
us
see
about it. Do one Mark find us a piece of it.
Well, Daddy Kiss It Better, it was a lovely play by Peter Nichols, who wrote, you may remember a play that made him famous was called, sorry?
Joey?
Joe Egg, yes, Day of the Death of Joe Egg, because he actually had a handicapped child, and he wrote a comedy about a handicapped child, which was in fact a theatre play. Now he wrote this play, Daddy Kiss It Better. Most of his plays are about marriages and how they work or how they don't work. You might well take note. And that was naughty thing to say. But this particular play with Dilys Lay and Michael Craig, I'd love to meet her, but I just loved it because it was a lovely play, I thought. But a little anecdote about it, which, if you haven't found it yet, right at the very end, we had the family playing Ring a Ring of Roses with Michael Craig, Dilys Lay, and my two children.
Can you find that, Uncle Mark, right at the very end? Yes, you'll find that.
Well, if you can. And it's my daughter, Sarah, who was about 4 or 5, and my son, who was even younger. And I said, yeah, they can do it. Of course, we'll bring them along. So my wife came along, and just before we were about to do it, Sarah fell over and grazed her knee. Well, it's pretty embarrassing when you're the director of the whole thing and your 6-year-old daughter is sitting on your knee saying, I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it. Peter Wills, the producer, is saying, oh, for goodness sake, look, the sun's going behind the cloud, for goodness sake, Chris. And in the end, she wouldn't do it. So we got a little girl out of the crowd and slung the clothes on her and said, for God's sake, play Ring a Ring of Roses, and that was it. Oh. But Peter Wills, who was fairly waspish, did you ever meet him?
No.
He was a head of drama. He was a fairly tricky character. He could have violent temperaments. He once threw a very heavy Apple paperweight at me, and I was standing behind his desk, or in front of his desk, and he threw it. I said something which he didn't like. He threw it at me, and I ducked, and it went straight through a plate glass partition into a corridor. If anybody had been walking past, it would have killed them. But anyway, he kept saying, your goblin daughter has ruined my play, your dreadful daughter has ruined my play. But he used to send her a Christmas present every year until he died. I mean, he was a delightful character. But that was Daddy Kiss It Better. I would, if you've got that, have you got the whole thing?
Yeah, the whole thing.
May I buy a copy?
Yeah, you can borrow it. You can borrow it.
Oh, I would love to. I would love to see it.
Have you found it, Mark? Have you found Ring a Ring of Roses yet?
It's right at the end for the captions, I think. But
there you are. Yeah, he's nearly there.
Don't worry.
It was very hard. As Simon said, you have directed so much over the years. It was hard to know what to show, what not to show. Because
you're very kind, but
you have done so many.
Well, I'm a hack. I mean,
that was recorded in London as well, wasn't it? That was one of the things he was still doing in London.
Yeah,
because the Leeds studios weren't ready.
That's absolutely right. And they opened their opening night transmission with that. But Michael Chapman, who you had here recently, because he's fairly prolific as well, and we did a lot of shows together.
Definitely.
And he used to say, Chris, we're a couple of hacks. And I always used to think that was a derogatory term. And he said, no, it isn't. He said, a hack is somebody who gets on with it, does it, and then gets on with it again. You know, you'll never win any awards, but you'll get the work done. And in those days, that's what you had to do: keep your nose clean and you keep in work. You know, that was.
Right. Okay, yeah,
man up.
Then come to tears. Let's.
You immediately start thinking about babysitters.
Well, somebody's got to.
Yeah.
If you want to go away.
Yeah.
Christine up the road might have the baby part of the time. I wonder if your dad will fetch him on Sunday night and keep him till we get back on Tuesday. Your mum doesn't mind the baby, it's Jane she can't bear. Oh, which reminds me, I forgot to tell you, Carol, she gave me a baby tea on Wednesday. It was Wednesday. Oh, no!
Imagine what your son will say when you show it to him again when you get home. He'll be so embarrassed.
I think he will.
Rarely a time just described Hilda Braid as being a newcomer when she joined East End. I thought she'd been in more programmes than probably you've actually directed, you know. It's bizarre, really, isn't it?
Yes.
You did some great work at Yorkshire. We're going to talk a little bit about some of that. Well, while Mark finds us a clip of the rattlesnake, we showed a play in the bar just over an hour ago now, featuring a live rattlesnake called Hello Lola, to help you, Mark. And
if you could find a bit towards the end of the first half where he actually picks the rattlesnake up and holds it. You got it.
There you see. Is it there? Go on then. Do you want to show it to us? Oh, right. Okay, fine. Tell us about the rattlesnake.
Well, it was this ridiculous play that somebody had written where two people gamble with a rattlesnake, trying to pick it up and throw it away. And each time you pick it up, you win some money. This lady, we've just watched it. I mean, you'd never get away with it today, but at the time it was okay, and it doesn't creak quite as much as I thought it might. But how the hell do you shoot with a live rattlesnake? We thought you'd be able to milk it, but take the venom out. But apparently they go to sleep once you've done that. So the people who provided the snake said there's nothing for it, but you've just got to go for it and have someone standing by with a syringe full of antidote. so they built this set and they made it snake proof by putting polythene on the floor. I'd also forgotten until we saw the film that there's a fish tank bursts in the middle of it too, so it had to contain the water. But the snake couldn't get out. When we did the shots with the snake, we were told by the management we had to empty the studio and only have the cameraman, the boom operators, floor manager, absolutely crucial people there. And as I say, once the snake was in the set, it couldn't get out. We had to seal all round the bottom of the flats and put a wall across the front. The fascinating thing was we did all these various shots. We had three sorts of snakes. We had a deep frozen one that was dead. I mean, it would have to be dead if it was deep frozen. We just used that when it was asleep. We had a dummy, which was made by pine wood, which made out of rubber. If you sort of wobbled the top, it made it look as though the bottom was wobbling. And then we had this live one. And so with a mixture of all three, we sort of got away with it. I think we got away with it, didn't we? You sort of believe it, don't you? Don't you believe it? Oh, I believed it.
What did the stars make of it?
Well,
were they delighted?
No, Jill Bennett. We rehearsed for 3 weeks with a bit of hose pipe, and then on the day the snake arrived, it came in a dustbin, rattling away, and it's a terrible noise. I don't know if you've ever heard a rattlesnake, particularly in a dustbin. But she'd been saying, I can't wait to meet my co-star. I want to meet my co-star. What about my co-star? I mean, it's difficult to tell which was the most viperous, I can tell you that. But anyway, she was okay. Bless her. Mustn't speak ill of the dead. No, she was all right. But when they brought it in this dustbin and they took the lid off, she looked in, all this sort of camp nonsense, and she went absolutely white. This thing sort of looked back at her again. So there we are.
Brilliant. Go on then, Mark. Shall we have a quick look at it?
But there was one shot which it was before that. It's not worth looking for, but they were betting, you see, as to who could pick it up the most number of times. But Sebastian Shaw, the old man, the elder of the two there, he was terribly game. There was a shot where he actually bent down and picked up the rubber one, but then the handler put on the same costume and held the snake that close to his face, and it looked like his hand, but in fact we put the camera there, and this was the handler's hand sort of behind him, and the snake is that close to him, sort of spitting at him, with the other two actors in the background, and he stood there and let him do it. I mean, it was pretty brave, I think.
Trust, isn't it? Enormous trust.
But I will just tell you, it was the most wonderful feeling of power having that snake in the studio, because the electricians' union were being particularly difficult up in Yorkshire, and they would put the lights out bang on the nose. If you were scheduled to finish at 6 o'clock, even if you were in the middle of a scene that you were on the verge of finishing, they just put the lights out so that they actually ruined the play and you'd have to come back and rebuild the set next week. Nobody was going to go into that studio with a snake in there and stop us, because they were all outside, the doors were locked, and they said, "You've got to finish, Chris, at 6. And I said, "Well, who's going to stop me?" And everybody was very happy in the studio to go on. So we won that one.
You got a very reputation for challenges, and I have noticed that the upstairs downstairs we showed also in the bar earlier, and I think it was called It's Your Move, wasn't it, as well? You've got a good reputation for doing a lot of what are called big outside broadcast shoots in your career.
It's very kind of you, Chris. I mean, a lot of people have done them, and they've done them very successfully, and by comparison with what we see today on our screens, they're pretty pathetic, really. But they did break new ground at the time, because most television drama was studio-based. Any exteriors were shot on film, and cameras hadn't got so small and handleable as they are now. So when you went outside, we did another one written by Kevin LaFan, who went on to become famous and wrote Emmerdale Farm, which I think is still running. And this was a play set in a bingo hall. We did nearly the whole play. And again, it was the days when we were able to negotiate with the unions after they became rather difficult. But to begin with, then we began to get more friendly. And we used to work all night. We did this play working, once the bingo hall finished, it was all set in the bingo hall, and the bingo hall shut at 10, and we moved in. And we did nearly the whole play between 10 o'clock at night and about 8 in the morning, because you can't tell in the bingo hall whether it's day or night. And that was mainly shot on location with big cameras. And I enjoyed doing it because it meant meticulous planning. And I quite like that. I mean, you've got to know exactly what everybody's going to do at any one time, and it needs work. It doesn't just happen. But if you work it out and it works, it's very rewarding, and I was lucky it worked 9 times out of 10. You haven't talked about any of my disastrous failures. I mean, they're presumably, you bring those up for the last 10 minutes or so.
Yes. We're doing half an hour on the success here, 5 hours on the ones that didn't
I thought you
later.
might.
That's fine, that's okay, you're fine about that, as it were. Tell me about Reg Varney. Perhaps Mark can dig out the best pair of legs in the business. God, this was a play you did for Yorkshire.
That's right.
It became a film. I don't know much about your film career, really. So.
Well, that's about it. That was it. One film, I think. Yes, this was a play with Reg Varney. Again, it was Yorkshire television, and Reg Varney played the equivalent of a redcoat at a holiday camp, and it was a caravan park, and it was a sort of failed comic who was earning a living during the summer, and if he was lucky he got pantomime in the winter, and that was it. And his career sort of fell apart, and he was very, very good in it, and it got wonderful notices as a television play, again written by Kevin LaFan, funnily enough. And so Reg always wanted to make a film, and bless him, he said, "I'll only do it if Chris directs it." And sure enough, somebody put the money up, and I thought, at last, I'm going to make a film now. This is going to be wonderful. All the pressures of television, all gone. I'm going to have time to get everything absolutely right. Mad fool. I mean, I can tell you, the production manager is standing in the wings with a stopwatch. "Come on, Chris," he said, "you've got to get this scene in. You've only shot 4 minutes and 13 seconds today. The scene got to be in by 5 o'clock. You've only got quarter of an hour." I mean, honest to God, it really is like slave labour. I didn't enjoy my film career. The film was a disaster. Quite why, I don't know. I think mainly because it got the wrong publicity. What happens, you get the front office people, you know, they've got a film with Reg Varney in it, so they immediately, oh, Reg Varney, girls, legs, bikinis, bottoms, you know, best pair of, set in a holiday camp, lots of pictures of girls in swimsuits. It wasn't that sort of film at all. So the people who would have enjoyed the film didn't go to see it because it was wrongly publicised, and the people who went to see it because it was publicised wrongly didn't enjoy it.
Yeah.
So that's really...
Can we have a look at the piece, Mark? Let's have a look at Reg Varney in a straight role.
Yeah, he was good,
Doing
actually.
a serious role for a change.
Come on. I wanna wander around your back street. Sing up, everybody. See the tumble down old shaggy streets. What's that? Don't you know the words? How do you know the words? Oh, look, everybody know this one. Come on. Oh, hometown, where the doves are softly cooing. Oh, come on, you lazy lot. Don't you remember old Bud singing this one?
All my time, John.
Get you, darling. I'm not with usual, you know.
Well, you could have fooled me.
That would be difficult, would it, eh? It's got to be quick. There's an old house door. We used to put there.
What's his chromosomes look at, I reckon?
What?
Chromosomes. You know what chromosomes are, don't you? They're what make you what sex you are. Well, look at him. Can't tell him he's XX or XY.
He looks OS to me.
It's not close. See, it's like this. A man is XX. So.
Does that take you back a bit?
It does.
You went on from Yorkshire to work for LWT.
Yeah,
For long.
yeah.
And then you mentioned Michael Chapman. I presume that's where you met Michael Chapman.
Quite right.
That became quite a productive partnership for you, didn't it? I mean,
Yes, we did a lot. We did a lot.
to.
I mean, you see, in those days, it's not the same now. I feel terribly sorry for anybody who's trying to make a career for themselves in television, because there are so many production companies and there are so many good directors chasing not enough work. In those days, as I say, if you kept your nose clean and if you delivered the goods, you developed a relationship with one particular company, London Weekend, Yorkshire, or whatever, and they would ask you back to do the next series if you got on with everybody. That was half the battle, try and get on with people. But Michael Chapman, he and I did get on very well. He has a particularly childish sense of humour, and I think that might have something to do with it. But we did Enemy at the Door, with other directors, of course, and I did a couple of plays with him at the BBC, the Harriet Strong Poison, with Michael Simpson was on that as well.
Right.
And then he did Enemy at the Door, as I say, about the Channel Islands, the occupation of the Channel Islands. And a play which he wrote, which should have been the forerunner of a very successful series. And I think it proves why the producer should never be the writer, because Michael Chapman had written it, and as a producer, he could make decisions which should be given to a third party. It was too long. And
Was that Pretoria?
yeah. And funnily enough, it was allocated a 90-minute slot. When he gave it to me and we timed it, I said, look, it's never going to go into an hour slot. It's once an hour and a half slot. Well, there's no such thing. So he said, we'll go for a 2-hour slot. And of course, he expanded it and it did an half show. So that went out with the bathwater. But it was fun to do because it was shot in Belgium, in Bruges, and a lot of it, and then the rest of it was done in the studio. But Michael Chapman was a great character, a very, very good producer, and he went on, of course, to do the bill.
And you spent many years doing the bill with him.
Well, what a lucky guy. There was I sort of approaching retirement, thinking, how does one wind down a career? Because most people are told round about 55 in my business, go on, put you out to grass, mate, you're too old, come on, the young ones are coming along. But when the bill was running, we got on very well. They needed lots of directors, and every so often they'd phone me up and I'd do a couple of episodes. And then I was rather ill, and I was sort of in my mid-60s, I suppose, and I thought, well, that's the end of my career. But then I got better, and Michael Chapman phoned up and said, I hear you haven't been very well. So I said, no, but I'm fine now. He said, you want to come back to work? If ever you want to come and do a couple of episodes of The Bill, give us a ring. Well, you can't ask for anything better than that, can you? So I was able to run my career down at my pace, which was really very gratifying.
I'm hoping that Mark's going to find an extract from one of your very early bills, your 50-minute bill.
Oh, yes, because
when it began as an hour
yeah,
series.
I mean, that's been through a tremendous number of different formats, hasn't it? How do you think? May I ask you a question? What do you think about it now? Or perhaps you don't watch it?
I don't watch it every single week, like all the way through, but I catch bits of it because one of the projects the Kaleidoscope does is to catalogue the credits of TV programmes. So I spend half an hour every week looking at the end credits of the programme, and the 10 minutes either side of it. And what it strikes me is that it's much more of a soap opera than it ever was, you know, and it's lost some. It's retained, I suppose, one of the visions of the original producer and writer, in the sense that it's always shot from the point of view of the police officers still. So you don't get scenes without police officers in them. It's always from their point of view. But somehow it doesn't seem to quite have the same sort of, I don't know, almost like real life feel to it. This early clip we're going to show you now has a real sort. I think the way it was shot, perhaps it was something you weren't conscious of. Perhaps you were told to do it. It was more like, almost like, you know, a documentary type feel to the way it was made.
That was very much the style we went after, and it was actually, to be fair, Peter Cregeen who invented it, because he did the very first episode. Have I time to tell you a little anecdote?
Yeah.
Which just shows you that you can never please all the people all the time. There was one particular episode of The Bill which I did, which was about a cot death. And it was I think it was a very well-written episode, and it's a terrible thing. The police hate it because they always have to investigate it, and of course they're seeing parents at their most vulnerable, and they hate it. And so we did this episode, which was basically about a cot death. And the day after it was transmitted, one or two letters came in, and Michael Chapman, funnily enough, said, pop over to my office, Chris. He said, I want you to show you a couple of letters. So I went over, and it was a letter from a policeman who worked in I can't remember where now, but he worked obviously in the police force. And he said, I just wanted to congratulate you on last night's episode of The Bill about the cot death. It was one of the best and most accurate episodes I've ever seen, and I thought it was very moving and wonderful entertainment and totally accurate. I said, yes, isn't that nice? And he said, now read this one. And this was from another policeman who said, last night's episode was the biggest load of crap I've ever seen. So you can't get them all right.
That's quite true. Can we have a quick look, Mark? See, this brings back any memories. Can we have a bit from the actual episode, Mark? Can you move it on, perhaps, just a little bit? He's going to move on a bit ears first, just to give you the chance to... Yeah, just a small bit. Anyway, that bit like...
No, leave us be. I ain't done nothing to you.
You've been giving it to one of our girls, you're going to pay for that.
Leave me alone.
I think it's a real claustrophobic feel to it. It's almost like going back to the origins of live TV. Lots of close-ups, and you really feel like you're in there.
Cheer, mate! You like stiff? Do it.
Oh!
That's where I feel it's different to today. It's got a much more gritty edge to it that you wouldn't get from the ITV network now.
Is that in black and white?
It was in colour.
Was it?
It was just a bit washed out.
Yeah. And that's true. It's very interesting, isn't it? This business of what you're allowed to show and what you're not allowed to show. I mean, nowadays they really do show practically everything. I mean, if we're talking about sex scenes or violent scenes or murder or whatever, I mean, nothing seems to be taboo. Some years ago, I had to do a knifing in a lift. And once again, in those days, we were very carefully controlled as to what we could show and what we mustn't show. And all I did was show a close-up of a knife in somebody's hand, which very big close-up, which went out of shot. And then a close-up of the person who was being stabbed face. And as the knife went out, we edited it, obviously, with a like that. And after it was shown, they said, you should never have shown the knife going in. I said, have a look at it again. And it didn't. It's amazing what you can do if it's properly edited. This is tremendous fun. I mean, if you can get round the rules in certain ways.
I think it's time to open it out for a few questions. You've worked on so many shows, I can't cover all of them. Questions from the audience. We've got 10 minutes or so. Any shows?
This is always the embarrassing moment when no one says anything.
Well, I'm hoping Simon's here, and I know Tony's here. Simon just wants to talk about the organisation, but go on, Tony, you go first.
Well, having come from the same background of the days of ITV when there were jobbing directors who were just told to go and do it, I noticed that the extraordinary list of credits you have included small time. And I remember working with ever so many directors who were just suddenly told, right, it's Tuesday, you've got to do the epilogue, or it's Friday, you've got to do an ad mag, or whatever. Did you ever get a sense of bewilderment about the range of programs that you just told?
Most days, I think. No, not really. No, I seem to settle down into sort of drama or drama series, which is ironic because I love music. And I would really love to have worked on light entertainment, but never got the opportunity to do it. I'm not complaining. I was terribly lucky to get the jobs that were sent my way, and I enjoyed doing them. But I would love to have worked on musical shows. But I never felt bewildered that I was being asked to do lots of different. So I'm sorry. Were you at Rediffusion?
That was Scottish.
At Scottish, yeah. And were you a director?
Alas, no. I was a mere front of camera person.
What sort of front?
Continuity announcer and many other things, weren't you?
I don't know how you do that, you see, with somebody in your ear hole rattling away at you while you're trying to look as though you know what you're talking about.
It's called doing a job, love.
Yeah, but only very few people can do it.
Do you feel you were pigeonholed then as a drama director?
I did seem to be, I think, yeah. I used to put forward ideas with music in them. Funnily enough, I did do one with music, which you also haven't listed. You remember Hotel Imperial?
Oh, yes, I do. Yeah.
Vic Oliver.
Yeah.
I used to put forward ideas, what about this idea? But they always said, no, too expensive. It wouldn't be, and nobody want to see it,
Never mind. You got to work with Harry H. Corbett on Mr. H then?
That's right, yeah, Harry Corbett and Mr. Digby Darling, that I enjoyed. There's nothing like hearing an audience.
We're showing one of those at 3:30, and Mr. Digby Darling.
Next door, isn't it?
In here.
Oh, in here?
Yeah.
I shall stay and watch that.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I don't think there was anything more to say.
No,
We were just talking
Any
about...
more questions?
You were credited on the original series of Chucky, and I was wondering if you could say what the involvement was in that, the 10 series.
Yes, I remember it well. I'm sorry, what was the question? I have to speak up just a bit. I'm a bit hard of hearing. The problem?
Now, what was your involvement?
My involvement?
On Chucky?
Oh,
Because you shared the directing.
I did 3 of them, yes, with Vic.
Hughes.
Thank you. Yeah, who is no longer with us.
No.
And it was great. I'd never read the book until I was asked to work on the series, and I had expressed an interest in doing children's drama because I think it's quite important, and that particular story I think is a very good one. John Wyndham, isn't it? And the main my involvement was directing 3 episodes, but with a little boy who was so talented. Have you seen that one? Chucky?
Yes.
I mean, that little boy is so good. And Sheila Kanani, who was the producer, if I remember rightly, I think she was instrumental in finding him. But he was such a delight to work with, because you were able to just give him a simple note, and he understood totally. I shall never forget being completely put in my place by him once when we were, again, shooting a sequence with live cameras, and he was reacting too early. Somebody was saying something, and we wanted his reaction to it, but he was doing it too soon, and I said, I've forgotten his name, but now look, I said, when he says the line, the camera is not switching to you until a beat after he's finished it, so don't do the reaction until he's finished the line. He said, you mean you want my reaction to grow? I said, that's it.
Excellent. Any more questions? Simon? Come on, you've been waiting for 20 years to talk about the organisation. Now is your time to ask.
I've only just got back in. I've been went out to change a tape, and I got
I know.
Yes, can I ask you about the organisation? You directed about half of
I did 3. Jimmy Ormerod did the other. They were great. They were such adult scripts. I haven't seen them since we made them, but at the time they seemed very enjoyable. Philip Mackey was a great writer, and it was a wonderful cast. And we had a ball making it. Donald Sinden, who I have worked with 3 or 4 times. I used to do Our Man at St Mark's ages ago with him. He took over from Leslie Phillips, you may remember. And Donald Sinden, he always plays the same trick on the cast. He forgets, when he's working with people he's worked with before, he forgets that some people know it. I bet he still does it. He arrives at the first rehearsal, immaculately dressed, usually in a morning suit, with a stiff collar and pinstripe trousers and highly polished shoes. We've all turned up in our scruffy old clothes, of course. So everyone thinks, Donald Sinden, oh Christ, we better dress up a bit tomorrow. So the next day we all put our coat on, and of course he comes in an old rugger shirt and a pair of shorts and completely shows us up. And he pulls that trick on every single script he does, every single play he does. But there was one episode in that which might amuse you. Anton Rogers and Peter Egan, who were great friends, had a scene together, and it was very funny. I can't remember what it was about now, but it was really a beautifully written scene, and they played it perfectly, and we never got through it without them falling apart and starting to laugh and giggle. Well, you do the producer's run, which is when the producer comes to actually see the show just before you go into the studio the next day to do it. And if the producer wants to make any notes, that's when he makes them. And he expects to see a polished production. And one thing Peter Wills couldn't stand was actors giggling. So I said to these two, before he came, I said, whatever you do, please, on the producer's run, for God's sake, don't break down into giggles, because Peter Wills will go mad. I'll get the thick end of his tongue afterwards, so for God's sake, try and get through the scene. Of course they said, of course. And of course, when they played it without laughing, it was double as funny. And I was finding I was having to bite my lip to stop myself from giggling. In the end, I knew I was going to go, so I turned round, and all they could see was my shoulders shaking. But they managed to actually not giggle, for which I was grateful. But they said to me afterwards, "You bastard, you know." I couldn't stop myself.
There was a rumour that it was based on
Granada.
The politics of Granada.
I think it was. Whether that was true or not, I don't know. But Philip Mackey didn't. I think he had a bad time at Granada, didn't he?
Yeah.
Have you read the Dennis Foreman book?
Yes.
I don't know.
It's marvellous, isn't it?
Yes.
Fascinating, quite fascinating what went on there. Somebody else had a question. The gentleman at the
Yes,
back.
there was somebody else. Go on. Yes.
You worked on one of my favourite shows, Upstairs, Downstairs.
Oh yes.
Particularly, I think one of the best seasons is the First World War, the episodes leading up to the First World War and the aftermath. I just wanted to ask, when you were working on the show, did you get the impression that you were working on something both important and groundbreaking?
I don't think so. The thing about Upstairs, Downstairs, it was a wonderful series to work on. Everybody was so professional and so happy, and particularly the First World War series, I agree with you, was beautifully observed, beautifully written, and more often than not, well acted. Have you read the book, which...
Inside Up Down.
Inside Up Down?
No,
well, it would be money well spent, because it gives
I'm going to hire you as our publicist.
Well, the reason I ask is because anything I could say is already in the book, and it was fun to research it. It was fun to do it, and one knew one was working on something that was quite good and a quality program, and one didn't have a sense of doing anything of particularly sort of historical importance, I don't think, if that was what your question was. But certainly one felt one was making television that really was possibly a little bit above the average. And it was fun to do, and one gave it all one had got, you know. We won most of them. It was very fun.
You were nominated for an award.
I know, but you see, it could only happen to an English television company. Dear Bill Bain was... nominated for an award in the second series for a play called The King Comes to Dinner. Is that the one? Is that what it's called? His episode that won the award? There's one episode, Bill Bain was nominated for an Emmy, and of course they didn't send anyone over to Los Angeles to collect it, and London Weekend won it, and there was no one there to pick it up. So the following year, would you believe, my episode, Women Shall Not Weep, was nominated for an Oscar. So London Weekend, oh, come on, let's send the team over. So about 8 of us were all sent over, and that year something else won it. So, typical, sort of only could happen with an English television company.
It's still nice to get that recognition.
It is very nice to get that recognition, and well,
wasn't there anything you really were glad not to work on? Anything you did that you thought, oh, let's bin this one?
Yeah, well, yes, funnily enough, though, there is, and you'll never be able to see it because I'm sure it doesn't exist anywhere, but it was a television version of Educating Archie. Educating what, you say? You're all so young. Do any of you remember a ventriloquist by the name of Peter Brough? You do, yes. Peter Brough and Archie Andrews. They did a radio show. I ask you, a ventriloquist on a radio show. Have you ever heard of anything so ridiculous? Well, when it came to the end of the radio show, some bright spark in commercial television thought it would be a good basis for a situation comedy, and for some reason, which to this day I shall never understand, they thought I would be the right person to direct it. Well, I was young, I was enthusiastic, and I wasn't going to throw any spanners in the work, but I mean, I could see a few snags to this, the main snag being that Peter Brough was probably the world's worst ventriloquist. I mean, this didn't matter much on sound radio, but you didn't have to be too much of a genius to work out it was a bit of a drawback on television. But worse than that, I mean, it was the most awful series. It was terrible. I didn't realise what sensitive people ventriloquists were. I made a terrible mistake on the first rehearsal. I didn't introduce Archie to the cast. Everyone sits round the table, and there was quite a Max Bygraves, Dick Emery, Irene Handel, I can't remember who else. Sorry? She was in the radio one. She wasn't a television one. But this was the television one. Of course, the first thing at rehearsal is to introduce everyone around the table. And Brough said, Peter Brough, Chris, old boy, you haven't introduced the star of the show. With that, he opened a box and produced Archie's head. No body, just the head. You haven't introduced Archie. Here he is, everybody. He then would walk about holding this head the whole time. And believe me, this was the worst 6 months of my life. After the first read-through, I was, having forgotten to introduce Archie, that was bad enough, I'm standing in the corner with the writers discussing the script while the stage management are getting the room ready for rehearsal. And Peter comes up carrying Archie's head, sort of swinging it about like a token, you know. He said, how's he going, boys? I said, oh, very well. I thought it was quite a good script. Yes, he said, yeah, quite a good script. Then he held Archie at arm's length as though he didn't want him to hear and said, Chris, old boy, Archie's not too happy about that bit on the top of page 3. Well, that was where I made my second biggest mistake of the morning. I said, well, I thought that bit was quite funny. I thought, Archie suddenly pipes up. It's not funny, it's smutty, and I don't do smut, do I, Brough? No, Brough, no. Well, tell Chris. This is the way it went on the whole time. These two would have conversations with each other. Now, I would just finish this story by telling that Irene Handel, who you may remember, who was in the cast, was the most wonderful lady. She always played the part of rather sort of downtrodden, simple, working-class ladies, but nothing could be further from the truth. She was as bright as a button, very sharp, and highly intelligent. And this business of talking to Archie and always having to think about her... I mean, if Brough wanted to finish rehearsal early... this is without a word of a lie. Archie's getting awfully tired, Chris. Could we finish? This would all the time. This used to drive Irene Handel mad, and she would come out with some really pithy remarks. I mean, they were always so sharp and delivered with an air of such innocence. You were never quite sure whether she realised just how arch she was being. And one occasion I shall always remember to the day I die. We're rehearsing a scene with Peter Brough sitting opposite Irene Handel and Archie in the middle. We finished the scene, and Peter Brough looks up at Irene Handel and said, "That was all right, wasn't it, Irene? You couldn't see my lips moving, could you?" And looking him straight in the eye, she said, "No, dear, no. Only when Archie was talking."
I think on that note, it's a wonderful place to say thank you, Chris Hodson.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you for having me.
Chris will be staying around for the rest of the afternoon, so you can chat to him. We're going to show Mr. Digby, darling.
I would love to see
Would
that.
you like to say a few words about it, and then Mark will run the tape. You can go and get a drink, you can, and you can relax and chat, or what's the episode?
I'd love to watch Mr. Digby, darling,
fine.
first, then I'll go and get a drink.
Okay.
Yeah, well, while you're lacing the I mean, this was about the only excursion I made into situation comedy, and working with Sheila Hancock and Peter Jones was an absolute joy. They were both so funny, so easy, I mean, Peter Jones was one of the funniest men I've ever talked to. I mean, just in natural terms, I mean, he was lovely. And they were a joy to work with, and we developed a really exciting start to the show, because what used to happen in those days was the warm-up man, would come out and get the audience all going, and then they'd be all ready, everyone sort of relaxed and happy. Then the floor manager would say, "Right, nice and quiet, everybody, going ahead in 1 minute." Of course, the audience freeze up again. So I said, let's do that. I said, let's rehearse the opening of the show, so that whatever your last joke is going to be to the audience, rather like you did just then, if the audience are happy and laughing, don't stop anybody. We'll get the tape running in plenty of time. Don't worry about that. When I know you're coming to the end, I'll run the tape. And as the laughter dies down, we'll hit the opening music, and you scurry for your opening positions, and we'll go into the caption routine. Of course, it worked a doddle, because the audience are in the show before they know it's even started. Yeah. And to hear that audience laugh, it's just wonderful. I really enjoyed that.
Right. Well, have a look. Tell us what you think afterwards.